Morning, Team G. This is Miss Dreise here. I'm going to read you the next chapter of Matilda. Now, if you didn't see the last chapter that I posted on Seesaw, it is under your activities, and the last chapter was called The Parent. So if you haven't listened to that chapter, then I would probably go back so that this one makes sense. I've also posted an activity sheet for you to do underneath this video, so you can have a look at that as well. Okay, this is called Throwing the Hammer. The nice thing about Matilda was that if you met her casually and talked to her, you would have thought she was perfectly normal. She displayed almost no outward signs of her brilliance, and she never showed off. This is a very sensible and quiet little girl, you would have said to yourself, and unless for some reason you had started a discussion with her about English or maths, you would have never known the extent of her brain power. It was therefore easy for Matilda to make friends with other children. All those in her class liked her. They knew, of course, that she was clever because they had heard her being questioned by Miss Honey on the first day of term. And they knew also that she was allowed to sit quietly with a book during lessons and not pay attention to the teacher. But children of their age do not search deeply for reasons. They are far too wrapped up in their small struggles to worry over much about what others are doing and why. Among Matilda's new friends was a girl called Lavender. Right from the first day of term, the two of them started wandering around together during the morning break and at lunch. Lavender was very small for her age, a skinny little nymph with deep brown eyes and dark hair that was cut into a fringe across her forehead. Matilda liked her because she was gutsy and adventurous. She liked Matilda for exactly the same reasons. Before the first week of term was up, awesome tales about the headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, began to filter through to the newcomers. Matilda and Lavender, standing in a corner of the playground during morning break on the third day, were approached by a rugged 10-year-old with a ball on her nose called Hortensia. That's a bit of a funny name. You can see there's Hortensia, and I assume that's Matilda and Lavender. You can see Hortensia is a lot bigger than them. "New scum, I suppose," Hortensia said to them, looking down from her great height. She was eating from an extra-large bag of chips and digging the stuff out in handfuls. "Welcome to Borstal," she added, spraying bits of crisp out of her mouth like snowflakes. The two tiny ones, confronted by this giant, kept a watchful silence. "Have you met the Trunchbull yet?" Hortensia asked. "We've seen her at prayers," Lavender said, "but we haven't met her yet." "Huh! You've got a treat coming to you," Hortensia said. She hates very small children. She therefore loathes the bottom class and everyone in it. She thinks 5-year-olds are grubs that haven't yet hatched. In went another fistful of crisps, and when she spoke, out sprayed the crumbs. "If you survive your first year, you may just manage to live through the rest of your time here. But many don't survive. They often get carried out on stretchers screaming. I've seen it." Hortensia paused to observe the effect these remarks were having on the two titchy ones. Not very much. They seemed pretty cool. So the large one decided to regale them with further information. "I suppose you know that Trunchbull has a lock-up cupboard in the private quarters called the Chokey. Have you heard about the Chokey?" Matilda and Lavender shook their heads and continued to gaze up at the giant. Being very small, they were inclined to mistrust anyone that was larger than they were, especially senior girls. "The Chokey," Hortensia went on, "is a very tall but very narrow cupboard. The floor is only 10 inches square, so you can't sit down or squat in it. You have to stand, and 3 of the walls are made of cement with bits of broken glass sticking out all over, so you can't lean against them. You have to stand, more or less, at attention all the time. When you get locked up in there, it's terrible." "Can't you lean against the door?" Matilda asked. "Huh, don't be daft," Hortensia said. "The door's got thousands of sharp, spiky nails sticking to it. They've been hammered through from the outside, probably by the Trunchbull herself." "Have you ever been in there?" Lavender asked. "My first term I was in there 6 times, Hortensia said, "twice for a whole day, and the other times for 2 hours each. But 2 hours is quite enough. It's pitch dark, and you have to stand up dead straight, and if you wobble at all, you get spiked by the glass in the walls or the nails on the door. Why were you there? Or why did you get put in? Matilda asked. What had you done? The first time, Hortensia said, I poured half a tin of golden syrup onto the seat of the chair the Trunchbull was going to sit on. It was wonderful. When she lowered herself into the chair, there was a loud squelching noise similar to that made by a hippo when lowering its foot into the mud. But you're too small and stupid to have read the Just So stories, aren't you? I've read them, Matilda said. Here's Hortensia. She's got all the chips spraying out of her mouth as she tells Matilda and Lavender her stories. You're a liar, Hortensia said amiably. You can't have read them yet. But no matter. So when the Trunchbull sat down on the golden syrup, the squelch was beautiful, and when she jumped up again, the chair sort of stuck to the seat of those awful green breeches she wears and came up with her for a few seconds until the thick syrup slowly came unstuck. Then she clasped her hands to the seat of her breeches and both hands got covered in the muck. You should have heard her bellow. Her bellow is like when you yelling in anger. But how did she know it was you? Lavender asked. A boy called Ollie Bogwhistle sneaked out on me, Hortensia said. I knocked his front teeth out. And the Trunchbull put you in the chokey for a whole day? Matilda asked, gulping. All day, Hortensia said. I was off my rocker when she let me out. I was babbling like an idiot. What were the other things you did to get put in the chokey? Lavender asked. Oh, I can't remember them all now, Hortensia said. She spoke with the air of an old warrior who has been in so many battles that bravery has become common. It's all so long ago, she added, stuffing more crisps in her mouth. Yes, I can remember one. Here's what happened. I chose a time when I knew the Trunchbull was out of the way teaching the year 6, and I put up my hand and asked to go to the bogs. Do you know what the bogs are? It's actually another name for the toilet. But instead of going there, I sneaked into the Trunchbull's room, and after a speedy search, I found the drawer where she kept all her gym knickers. See, she's going into the Trunchbull's drawer and see she's doing something. Maybe you can guess what she might be able to do or what she might be about to do. Go on, Matilda said. What happened next? I had sent away by post, you see, for this very powerful itching powder, Hortensia said. It cost 50 pence a packet and was called the Skin Scorcher. The label said it was made from the powdered teeth of deadly snakes, and it was guaranteed to raise welts the size of walnuts on your skin. So I sprinkled this stuff inside every pair of knickers in the drawer, and then folded them up again, carefully. Hortensia paused to put more crisps in her mouth. Did it work? Lavender asked. Well, Hortensia said. A few days later, during prayers, the Trunchbull suddenly started scratching herself like mad. Aha, I said to myself, here we go. She's changed for Jim already. It was pretty wonderful to be sitting there watching it all and knowing that I was the only person in the whole school who knew what was going on inside the Trunchbull's pants, and I felt safe. I knew I couldn't be caught. Then the scratching got worse. She couldn't stop. She must have thought she'd had a wasp's nest down there, and then, right in the middle of the Lord's Prayer, she leapt up and grabbed her bottom and rushed out of the room. Both Matilda and Lavender were enthralled. It was quite clear to them that they were at this moment standing in the presence of a master. Here was somebody who brought the art of skullduggery to the highest point of perfection, somebody who was willing to risk life and limb in pursuit of her calling. They gazed in wonder at this goddess, and suddenly even the boil on her nose was no longer a blemish, but a badge of courage. But how did she catch you? That time, Lavender asked, breathless with wonder. She didn't, Hortensia says, but I got a day in the chokey just the same. Why? They both asked. The Trunchbull, Hortensia says, has a nasty habit of guessing. When she doesn't know who the culprit is, she just makes a guess. And the trouble is, she's usually right. I was the prime suspect this time because of the golden syrup job, and although I knew she didn't have any proof, nothing I said made any difference. I kept shouting, how could have I done it, Miss Trunchbull? I didn't even know you kept any spare knickers at school. I don't even know what itching powder is. I've never heard of it. But the lying didn't help me, in spite of the great performance I put in. The Trunchbull simply grabbed me by one ear and rushed me to the chokey and threw me inside and locked the door. It was absolute torture. I was spiked and cut all over when I came out. It's like a war, Matilda said. You're darn right it's like a war, Hortensia cried, and the casualties are terrific. We are the Crusaders, the army fighting for our lives with hardly any weapons, and the Trunchbull is the Prince of Darkness, the foul serpent, the fiery dragon. It's a tough life. We all try to support each other. You can rely on us, Lavender said, making her height of 3 feet and 2 inches stretch as tall as possible. No, I can't, Hortensia said. You're only thrimps, but you never know. We might find a use for you one day in some undercover job. Tell me just a little bit more about what she does, Matilda said. Please do. I mustn't frighten you before you've been here a week, Hortensia said. You won't, Lavender said. We may be small, but we're quite tough. Listen to this then, Hortensia said. Only yesterday, the Trunchbull caught a boy called Julius Rotwinkle eating licorice all sorts during the scripture lesson, and she simply picked him up by one arm and flung him clear out of the open classroom window. See in the picture? Our classroom is 1 floor up, and we saw Julius Rotwinkle go sailing out over the garden like a frisbee and landing with a thump in the middle of the lettuces. Then the Trunchbull turned to us and said, From now on, anybody caught eating in class goes straight out the window. Did this Julius Rotwinkle break any bones? Lavender asked. Only a few, Hortensia said. You've got to remember that Trunchbull once threw the hammer for Britain in the Olympics, so she's very proud of her right arm. What's throwing the hammer? Lavender asked. The hammer, Hortensia said, is actually a ruddy great cannonball on the end of a long bit of wire, and the thrower whisks it round and round his head faster and faster and then lets it go. You have to be terrifically strong. The Trunchbull will throw anything around just to keep her arms in good shape, especially children. Good heavens, Lavender said. I once heard her say, Hortensia went on, that a large boy is about the same weight as an Olympic hammer, and therefore he's very useful for practicing with. At that point, something strange happened. The playground, which up to then had been filled with shrieks and the shouting of children, all at once became silent as a grave. Watch out, Hortensia whispered. Matilda and Lavender glanced out and saw the gigantic figure of Miss Trunchbull advancing through the crowd of boys and girls with menacing strides. The children drew back quickly to let her through. A formidable figure she was too, in her belted smock and green breeches. And you can see Miss Trunchbull looking pretty scary. Below the knees, her calf muscles stood out like grapefruits inside her stockings. Amanda Thrip, she was shouting. Amanda Thrip, come here. Hold your hats, Hortensia whispered. What's going on? Lavender whispered. That idiot Amanda, Hortensia said, has let her long hair grow even longer during the holidays, and her mother has plaited it into pigtails. Silly thing to do. Why silly? Matilda asked. If there's one thing the Trunchbull can't stand, it's pigtails. Matilda and Lavender saw the giant in green advancing upon the girl of about 10, who had a pair of plaited golden pigtails hanging over her shoulders, and you can see that in the picture, her long pigtails. Each pigtail had a blue satin bow at the end of it, and it looked very pretty. The girl wearing the pigtails, Amanda Thrip, stood quite still, watching the advancing giant, and the expression on her face was one that you might find on the face of a person who is trapped in a field with an enraged bull, which is charging towards her. The girl was glued to the spot, terror-struck, pop-eyed, quivering. That's when you shake when you're scared. Miss Trunchbull reached the victim and stood towering over her. I want those filthy pigtails off before you come to school tomorrow. She barked. Chop 'em off. Throw 'em in the dustbin, you understand? Amanda, paralysed with fright, managed to stutter. My mummy likes them. She plaited them for me every morning. Your mummy's a twit, the Trunchbull bellowed. She pointed a finger the size of a salami at the child's head and shouted, You look like a rat with a tail coming out of its head. My mummy thinks I look lovely, Miss Trunchbull, Amanda stuttered, shaking like a blunt mange. I don't give a tinker's toot what your mummy thinks. And with that, she lunged forward, grabbed hold of Amanda's hair in her right fist and lifted the girl clear off the ground. Then she swung her round and round her head, faster and faster, and Amanda was screaming, and the Trunchbull was yelling, "I'll give you pigtails, you little rat." And now the Trunchbull was leaning back against the weight of the girl and pivoting on her toes, spinning round and round. See poor Amanda? As soon Amanda Thrip was travelling so fast she became a blur, and suddenly, with a mighty grunt, the Trunchbull let go of the pigtails, and Amanda went sailing like a rocket right over the wire fence of the playground and into the sky. "Well thrown, sir," someone shouted from the playground, and Matilda, who was mesmerised by the whole affair, saw Amanda Thrip descending in a long, graceful parabola onto the playground field below. "She's mad," Hortensia said. "But don't the parents complain?" Matilda asked. "Would yours?" Hortensia asked. "I know mine wouldn't. She treats the mothers and fathers just the same as the children, and they're all scared to death of her." There's Amanda. You can see she's landed in the playground. Okay, that's it for today. I'll put the activities below. And the next chapter I will read next week. Bye.